I'm excited to announce that the Fixer audiobook is now available. You can find it on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. This book features Kirk Hoffman. He is an attorney who only represents the innocent and works behind the scenes to help his client. But when Dwayne Sachs, a contentious online influencer and the son of a former client, comes to Hoffman on a murder charge, he can't say no, even though it seems like a simple case and there is little doubt Dwayne is guilty, because he just seems the type. Dwayne is caught on camera visiting Rebecca Sheffield, the victim, in her hotel room shortly before she was found brutally stabbed to death, and there are no other suspects. But Hoffman sees something others don't and signs Dwayne as a client. So that's just a little bit from the book description. I will actually have the whole of chapter 1 at the end of this podcast, so make sure to listen for that. This week I started draft 6 of Jason Maxfield number 4. At this stage, things start to move much more quickly for me as I go through the drafts, and I'm frequently pulling out things that just aren't really contributing to the story or are things that I was thinking of doing but aren't really working. But I thought it would be interesting to read just a little bit of an excerpt from this book this week. So this is a work in progress excerpt. So some of it might change. Some of it could be completely deleted. I'm pretty sure that this scene is going to be part of the initial book, and it will be chapter 1. Erica Carlyle was at first taken aback by the tall man with light brown hair and assumed he was about to hit on her. He would have been handsome had it not been for a broken nose sometime in the past that hadn't properly healed, and a recent scab on the right side of his cheek that looked like it had gone untreated. Ms. Carlyle? The man didn't make an attempt to smile and had an undeniable Russian accent. A chill ran down Erica's back. I'm sorry, I don't know who you're talking about. She stood, leaving her drink at the bar while throwing down a $10 bill. She was relieved when the man didn't immediately get up too, but it didn't last long because he spun on his bar stool, a wry grin forming on his face. As Erica turned to leave, she came face to face with a gorgeous blonde woman who was 3 inches shorter than her. If you won't talk to him, maybe you'll talk to me. The woman had the hint of an accent, too. Russian? Erica pushed past. Excuse me, I was just leaving. The severe woman stepped into her path again, latching onto her arm with a vice-like grip. We want a moment, if you wouldn't mind. She nodded toward the back of the bar. Her implication Erica should go with them was clear. All right, so that's a little excerpt from the current work in progress. It should be out sometime later this year. Anyhow, I'm also working on Audrey Spencer number 2 and did a little bit of a rewrite on the outline this week, and very pleased with the direction the story is going in. So can't wait to get that out to you. So now, without any further ado, this is chapter 1 of The Fixer, legal thriller. It's narrated by Eric Dove and, of course, written by me. Copyright for both the production and the text is me, Daniel A. Decker. Anyhow, here you go. Here is the first chapter. I hope you enjoy it.
1. The young deputy district attorney on the other side of the table reminded me of a hawk. Dominic Barnard was tall and bony with a curved nose, and his face was covered in sweat. His dark hair had enough gel to make sure his messy mop stayed in place all day, even with the rainstorm dumping buckets of water just outside the diner door. Bernard's skin was so pale that I thought he might be sick, probably because he never went outdoors for long. They worked them hard at the Salt Lake County District Attorney's office. We were at Denny's, and I waited to drop the bomb until after we'd ordered breakfast, but before it was delivered. Bernard's hand trembled as he read the affidavit I'd just given him. I followed his eyes and saw he was halfway through the first page. Tell Cal Dobson he has 24 hours to drop all charges against my client, I said. I felt bad for the kid and hated that he had to bear the brunt of this. That's why I was addressing him as if he were the messenger. And then I'll take this matter out of his hands, and it will get ugly, I added as the waiter delivered our food. I took a sip of my orange juice but didn't reach for a fork, not yet. I didn't want to distract him from his reading. Bernard had been cocky before he'd seen the affidavit. He now bit his lip turning whiter the further he got. I'd gotten the feeling when we'd first met up that he was proud to be doing this on his own, but he probably now wished he had the more senior Deputy District Attorney Kyle Dobson with him. Dobson was an experienced prosecutor who was supposed to be showing Bernard the ropes, but he was a real piece of work, and the most dishonest attorney I'd ever encountered. I doubted Bernard was learning anything useful from the man. I could genuinely say I liked most people on the other side of the aisle, believing them to be honest and sincere individuals who were trying to do their jobs. But that wasn't Dobson. It was a shame Bernard had been assigned to this case with Dobson. Bernard had only been with the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office for 10 months, and I doubted he'd last another 10. This job wasn't right for the kid. Perhaps he belonged in corporate practice, tucked away in a cubicle at a big firm where he never had to interact with the other side. It had been my intention to meet with Dobson when I scheduled the appointment, but he backed out and sent Bernard in his place, perhaps sensing what I was up to. I'd suggested to Bernard that we meet on neutral ground as a way for him to save face, since I'd known what was coming. I didn't want to embarrass the young attorney by having him show up in my conference room surrounded by my staff. I could have suggested we meet at his office downtown, but I didn't want to risk one of his colleagues overhearing our conversation and witnessing his reaction. I wanted to give the kid an opportunity to recompose himself and spare him the indignity of having bystanders as I torpedoed their case against my client. Destroying their case is mandatory, I thought, but ruining this young attorney's confidence isn't required. I had him by the throat, and he knew it without me making it worse. And there wasn't anything he could do. I wouldn't have been so kind to Dobson. Perhaps another criminal defense attorney might have taken some satisfaction from pushing their foe into an uncomfortable corner, but I didn't. I was just doing my job. "If it makes it easier," I said, my features softening, "I know this wasn't your fault." And that was the truth. The decision to withhold exculpatory testimony and evidence had to have been made by Dobson, not Bernard. Dobson had likely convinced this gullible young attorney to go along with it, telling him it wasn't exculpatory or even relevant, so there was no obligation to turn it over. "But, Mr. Hoffman," Bernard said, "surely there's some arrangement we can—" I held up my hand. "When you say that, it sounds like you want to make a deal to bury this, and you and I both know that's something you'd never do." I held his eye. "You'd be risking your license if you offered up something foolish like that." The boy nodded as he swallowed, shaking his head and muttering. I didn't know what the kid was thinking, and I wouldn't let him go further for his own sake. "The way I see it is one of two things happened," I said. "Your team made a mistake and forgot to turn it over, or somebody hid it." Bernard looked up, and I could tell the truth without him admitting it. I held his eyes. "Now, I wouldn't accuse you of doing that. A lawyer fresh out of law school remembers the rules of professional responsibility better than somebody who's been practicing for 25 years, like Dobson." That was the last implication I'd make, that this was Dobson's decision, because Bernard appeared to have some culpability, even if Dobson had stuffed it down his throat. "But mistakes happen, kid," I continued. "Almost every attorney finds himself in a bind at one point or another. It's always better to fix it yourself. That's why I came to you instead of going to the judge. Or a reporter, I thought, but didn't say. I've got to call Dobson. Give me a sec." Bernard stood, left the diner, and walked into the rain. He stopped as if he'd make the call right there, but then went to his car. My phone erupted as I took it out and brought up the local news. It was my office calling, but I wouldn't answer, not while I was waiting for this kid. Our meeting wouldn't last much longer. Whatever was happening at my office could wait. I hid a frown as I dismissed the call and read the lead article. It was about somebody I'd met only once because I'd represented his father on a murder charge. Dwayne Sachs is a person of interest in a murder? I wondered. Dwayne's ex-girlfriend had been found dead the night before. It was unusual for the police to mention him as a person of interest so soon, especially because he was famous, not just locally but on a national scale. Maybe the cops felt they had solid evidence and needed to get ahead of him by launching a preemptive strike, which was why the story all but accused him of murder. I scanned the article, trying to read between the lines, a difficult challenge with so few facts. Dwayne would do almost anything to get his name in the news because he saw himself as an influencer. I usually had to give the guy points for creativity when he did, because he attracted more attention than anybody I knew. Countless articles had been written about him, garnering attention and bringing in millions of sales. The man seemed to have no self-control and ran his mouth, saying whatever he thought about whoever he wanted, regardless of the consequences. The number of defamation lawsuits he'd racked up was astonishing. I suspected he thought of the legal and settlement fees as the cost of doing business. But Dwayne Sachs wanted for murder? That seemed a bit of a stretch, even for somebody like him who was always testing boundaries and regularly offending people. Whoever was running the investigation didn't like Dwayne, probably because of his online behavior. He liked to poke fun at law enforcement and went out of his way to antagonize them. Knowing what I did about Dwayne, it could be a hoax to attract eyeballs to his social media feeds where he'd be talking about his company. Within a day or two, there'd be another story about how this was a misunderstanding. His primary business was selling back-end software to other businesses. The man was a skilled marketer and salesman. What didn't work for others worked for him because of his gregarious personality and willingness to be transparent about everything in his life. This was why I was skeptical, figuring there was more here than met the eye. Seeing Dwayne Sachs in the news brought back memories of when his father, Heath Sachs, had been charged with murder, convicted, and sent to prison. It was one of the few cases I'd ever lost because I usually prevailed upon my guilty clients to take plea bargains. Heath's case was from early in my career, right after I graduated and started my own practice. He'd been one of my first clients. His conviction had kept me up at night because I'd known that, as impossible as it seemed, my untrustworthy client was innocent. I'd tried to tell myself that he deserved it, but had known he was innocent of this particular crime, and that I couldn't let him serve time for something he hadn't done. It had taken 2 years and countless unpaid hours before I'd found a witness with the exculpatory testimony and evidence that I'd needed to get him out. Even though Heath Sachs hadn't been grateful and had blamed me for his incarceration, I counted it as a win, especially when compared to others who'd spent decades in prison before exoneration. Like his son, Heath wasn't the most likable guy, which was why the jury had found him guilty. I'd only spoken to Heath a handful of times since his release, but I always took note when I saw Dwayne back in the news. I tapped my finger against my cup, taking a sip of my orange juice as I scanned the article. I didn't see any mention of Dwayne's father. Another call from the office came in, but I ignored it. Bernard was still in his car with the phone to his ear. I received a text from my wife Tamara wishing me a good day. She'd run out the door right before I got into the shower. She was a CPA and had finished with her busy season, but still had weeks of work to do for clients who'd filed extensions. I'd barely seen her during the last 2 months and always felt like a bachelor during tax season, working all day while she pulled long hours. We both needed a break and had a vacation scheduled for June, but that seemed a long way off. The office called for a third time. I glanced outside and picked up the call. "What is it?" I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice, but only half succeeding. "Finally, Hoffman, you answer," Luck Schaefer said. I could tell from her tone that this wasn't an ordinary call. She was unflappable and careful about interrupting me while in a meeting, so it had to be important. Lux was my associate attorney and project manager. She was my get-it-done employee. She always had a plan for every task, kept me on track, and didn't let things slip through the cracks. If she was calling, it had to be important. "Do you need something?" I asked. She waited, and I got the idea she was surprised by my question. "You haven't seen the news?" "I'm reading it now." "You don't have any clue why I'm calling?" "None." "Dwayne Sachs has been charged with murder." I recognized the implication because she wouldn't care otherwise. "He called us?" "He's on his way. Might want to get back here. Said he was 40 minutes out. I figured you'd want to prep before his arrival." Bernard walked back into the diner as I disconnected. "We'll drop the charges, Hoffman." I grinned as he left, leaving his breakfast untouched. I didn't have a problem covering the check.